Hi guys, welcome back to Mer Murder, where we put the Mer in murder. I am your host, Mercedes Rose, and I'm so glad you guys are here for another week. Did you guys know that you can put your ID on your phone now, like our Apple Wallet? Isn't that crazy? I don't know if it's for all states. I know some people were saying that it's only for certain states. Should I tell you I live in one of the US states, and my state, you can put your ID on your phone, like as your Apple Wallet. So I was using it and I did the whole double tap to get all your cards or whatever. And it's just like a state card, and I guess you just put it on a scanner. I don't really know when that's really useful. Like, is that like when you're going to the club or something and you just scan your ID or something? I don't really know, because it's like, it looks the same like when you press like tap to pay. It's like the same thing, but I guess you have it for your ID. But why would you need to tap it? Like, what would you tap it on? I thought it was going to have like easy access to like be able to read your ID, but I guess that'd be kind of dangerous. I thought maybe after like you put your Face ID in it, it would like show you your actual ID, like numbers and everything. Because I think that's what I mostly need it for. Like, I need to be able to see my numbers. But I guess if my phone's on me, my ID is most likely on me too. Yeah, I get in so much trouble with my family and my friends because I always say like too personal of information. There's nothing personal about me. There is not a single TMI, private thing about me. I tell people my social security number, my birthday, my height, my weight. Like, I do not care. I'm such an open book. But I guess for the sake of this podcast and the fact that there's a bunch of strangers on the internet and I talk about murder, I definitely should not be sharing my personal information. But if you guys want to know, just DM me. You can follow the Instagram. You can like me. You can subscribe. You can comment. I will tell you everything that you want to know. Just kidding. No, I'm not. Thank you all so much for joining me this week, and I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Don't forget to leave me any ratings, comments, likes, subscribe, whatever you can to support the show. I appreciate it so very much, and I appreciate all of you. And let's get into today's case. So before we get into today's case, I would like to give a sensitivity warning, as we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. If you'd like to skip those parts of the case, please check the time codes in the description, but if not, please listen with care. Today's case is going to be a little bit different from how we usually cover our cases. We won't have the usual victim and suspect, but instead over hundreds of victims and possibly hundreds of suspects. Today we are traveling to the Great White North and covering our first case taking place in America's northern neighbor, Canada. Canada is famous for many things, such as breathtaking scenery, maple syrup, hockey, and probably most notably its well-mannered and caring citizens. But there is a huge ongoing problem taking place in the country that should be just as well known, but for some reason the people in power often turn a blind eye to it. That problem would be the safety and well-being, or lack thereof, of the Indigenous population, more specifically the Indigenous women and girls. The Indigenous population of Canada only takes up about 5% of the population, totaling to just around 1.8 million people out of the 41.5 million people that reside in the country. For the past few decades, over thousands of Indigenous women and girls have gone missing without a trace or have turned up murdered. There are many things that can be attributed to the Indigenous population's hardships that directly impact their current day-to-day life, and more importantly, their safety. Systemic racism, poverty, and probably worst of all, the after effects of the residential school system all play a part in this. The residential school system was a tool created in the 1860s, used to strip Indigenous children of their heritage and identity. These children were ripped from their families with little to no contact and were legally obligated to attend these schools from the ages of 7 to 15 for a range of semesters to years. The children would endure what could only be summed up as abuse and torment, facing physical and sexual abuse, forced labor, corporal punishment, and severe illness, as the conditions of the schools were extremely poor and the health of the children was not a priority to the administrators. These schools were not shut down until the late 90s, the last one being shut down as late as 1997 in Nunavut. The Canadian government did not formally apologize for their role in the residential school system until June 11th of 2008, but an apology could never repair the generations of trauma brought onto the Indigenous people, and to this day we witness the ripple effects of their abuse and mistreatment. Systemic racism often makes room for barriers for Indigenous people to buy homes, get a higher education, and even obtain higher paying jobs. And without access to the tools to better their lives, the Indigenous population experiences higher rates of poverty. In fact, Indigenous Canadians are almost twice as likely to experience poverty compared to their non-Indigenous counterparts. Now, this is where the safety of Canada's Indigenous women and girls faces its highest risk, as many of them need to travel into the major cities to go to school or get to work. And without public transportation in these areas, the women and girls often resort to hitchhiking. This is where our case really begins, because when you bring up the dangers of hitchhiking coupled with the conversations of Canada's missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, one major highway always comes to mind for Canadians, especially for the locals of British Columbia. That highway would be Highway 16, better known as the Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears refers to a 447-mile or 719-kilometer section of Canada's Highway 16. This specific section of the highway travels between two major cities in British Columbia, Prince George and Prince Rupert. From the year of 1970 to this very day, that section of Highway 16 is home to over 80-plus crime scenes surrounding the disappearance and murder of numerous Canadian women. But as the years passed, the public couldn't ignore the disproportionate number of Indigenous women and girls winding up missing and murdered on this road. And this began the call to action to protect the country's Indigenous women and girls. In 2005, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or better known as the RCMP, formed a task force that was given the directive to solve the missing and murder cases of the women found along the Highway of Tears. This task force was called E-Pana, E for the E division of the RCMP that held jurisdiction over British Columbia, and Pana stemming from the name of the Indigenous Inuit people's goddess who was believed to take care of souls of the deceased before they go to heaven or are reincarnated. Eventually, after taking on 9 cases in 2006, just a year later in 2007, the number doubled to 18, and the investigation expanded to Highways 5, 24, and 97. In order to consolidate the disappearances and murders happening along the major highways, the E-Pana task force created the following criteria to help them form a possible MO and help them uncover who could possibly be involved in the disappearances and murders of the women in Canada. 1, the victim had to be female. She, too, had to be engaging in high-risk behaviors such as hitchhiking and sex work. 3, she had to have gone missing from Highway 16 from Prince Rupert to Hinton, Highway 97 from Merritt to Fort Nelson, or Highways 5 and 24 from Valmont to 100 Mile House. And finally, the evidence must have shown attack from a stranger, not evidence of misadventure, suicide, or domestic violence, which is also a really big issue in the Indigenous community. The first victim of the E-Pana investigation was an Indigenous woman by the name of Gloria Moody. Gloria, better known as Lavina by her friends and family, was from Bella Coola, British Columbia. Lavina was a 27-year-old mother of 2, and her children were just 3 and 4 years old when she was murdered. Lavina went on a family road trip in October of 1969 to do some Christmas shopping and also spend the weekend outside of their little community of Bella Coola. As the family ventured on, they made a stop at a little cafe bar called the Frontier Inn, and it was there that they all noticed a man staring and basically drooling over Lavina. This made the young mom extremely uncomfortable, so bad that at one point her younger brother, Al, confronted the man for staring at his sister. When asked about his rude behavior, the man simply stated that Lavina was just, quote, so beautiful. But the family, especially Lavina, were so uneasy they decided to hop back on the road and make their way to their hotel in Lake William. Later that night, on October 25th, 1969, Lavina and her younger brother Al went out for a couple drinks at the Lakeview pub where they were met with tons of strangers. Apparently that weekend was pay weekend, which meant a big livestock sale was in town, leading to heavier foot traffic at the bars and hotels. By the end of the night, Lavina failed to return to the hotel from her night out, and her family immediately reported her missing to the RCMP. But unfortunately, before the search for Lavina could even begin, the recovery of her body was made the following morning on Sunday, October 26th. Lavina was found early Sunday morning by some hunters along a cattle trail just 7 miles west of Williams Lake. Her nude body was found beaten, tortured, and sexually assaulted. Her cause of death was ruled to be blood loss from her wounds, the most severe blood loss induced by the vaginal trauma she endured after being assaulted with a tree branch. Her body was found 149 miles or 240 kilometers from where the official start of the Highway of Tears begins, about a 2.5 to 3 hour drive. Lavina's murderer was never found, and her case has never been solved to this day, leaving her family to cope with the pain of this heinous and senseless crime with no closure. The second victim of the E-Pana investigation was 18-year-old Micheline Pear. Micheline was last seen hitchhiking along Highway 20 after 2 women dropped her off at the gates of Tompkins Ranch, which is a historic 1,339-acre farm located in British Columbia between 2 cities, Fort St. John and Hudson's Hope. On Saturday, August 8th of 1970, a group of people were out picking berries along Highway 20 when they stumbled across the body of 18-year-old Micheline. Her body was found 13 miles or 21 kilometers from where she was last seen near Tompkins Ranch. It was later ruled that Micheline was beaten to death with a blunt object, and although her body was badly decomposed, investigators also concluded that she was also sexually assaulted. Photos of Micheline were plastered all around British Columbia in hopes of obtaining any information regarding her whereabouts, final moments, or who could have been responsible for her murder. But all leads grew cold, and unfortunately, her case remains unsolved to this day, leaving her family with grief and a spot on a list with many others who have lost their girls to this deadly and mysterious force along the major highways of British Columbia. Our third victim was another young woman, 19-year-old Gail Ways. Gail came from a big family, being the second oldest of 9 siblings. She and her family lived in Kamloops, a bustling city in British Columbia where the North and South Thompson rivers meet. Known as Canada's tournament capital, the city was no stranger to, strangers. Tourists, athletes, locals, and just people from all walks of life often visited the city to partake or spectate the sports tournaments, hike along the beautiful trails, or enjoy the ski resorts located further north of the city. So you can only imagine the sense of adventure that a city like this may give a young woman like Gail, who decided to go on an adventure of her own when she went on to attend college in Clearwater, British Columbia. Gail worked 2 jobs in order to put herself through school and was an extremely independent young woman, according to her siblings. But even the most independent people need help sometimes, and unfortunately, on October 19, 1973, Gail found herself in a position where she did in fact need help, and ended up in a vulnerable position that would lead to her untimely demise. Late that Friday night, Gail was finishing up her shift at one of her jobs as a service station attendant. I guess in Canada, that's what they call their gas station attendants. It's basically the same job as what people in states like Jersey do. Like, if you've ever been there before, you go up there and you don't pump your own gas. Somebody handles the payments. They pump your gas. Sometimes they clean your car. It's kind of like an actual service in certain states where you just kind of get your gas pumped and they take care of whatever you need done. And I guess that was kind of one of Gail's jobs in Clearwater when she attended college. And yeah, on October 19th of 1973, she was looking to make her way back home, back to her family in Kamloops. Now, the distance between the two cities was 77 miles or 125 kilometers, which is about an hour and a half drive back home. So this was kind of a big ask, but Gail was extremely determined to make her way home. She made her way to the next most familiar place that she knew, the David Thompson pub, where she actually worked at for her second job. Gail asked the patrons if anyone was making their way towards Kamloops, but was turned down multiple times throughout the night, resorting to the old-school hitchhiking tactic of standing on the side of the road and sticking her thumb out in hopes of hitching a ride with the nicest stranger available. Gail was eventually picked up, but this stranger proved to not be so nice after all, as she went missing on that very Friday night in October. Her family was left completely devastated and in the dark for almost 6 months before they found out what happened to their little girl. On April 4th, 1974, the remains of Gail Ways was found in a ditch filled with water along Highway 5. She was completely nude with no trace of her belongings. Investigators were left with no evidence, no suspects, and no leads, and her case remains unsolved to this very day. However, in 2012, police announced that they did have a suspect in Gail's murder case. They believed Bobby Jack Fowler, a convicted rapist and murderer, may have been responsible for Gail's murder. However, Bobby Fowler died in prison in May of 2006 from lung cancer, so they were never able to get a confession out of him and lacked any concrete evidence that may have tied him to being involved in Gail's case. But it is strongly believed. Nevertheless, Gail and her family were unable to receive the justice they deserved and were left with the devastating fact that their little girl will never come home again. The fourth victim of the E-Pana investigation disappeared just a month following Gail's disappearance and murder, and the similarities between the two cases are pretty haunting. 19-year-old Pamela Darlington was last seen on November 6, 1973, hitchhiking down Tranquil Road at around 10:30 p.m. And Pamela was on her way back to Kamloops, the same exact city that Gail was trying to make her way back to. Now, the details surrounding Pamela's disappearance is a little cloudy. Her sister Laurel reported that her car broke down, so she resorted to hitchhiking into the city where she was due to meet some friends before she disappeared. However, her cousin Sharon stated that those friends of hers told the family that Pamela did in fact make it to the David Thompson pub that night. The same pub where Gail, our third victim, worked at and was last seen before her disappearance and murder just a month before. So according to her sister Laurel, Pamela never made it to the city to meet her friends, and that's around the time that she went missing. But according to her cousin Sharon, she actually did make it to the city, and she went to the same pub, the David Thompson pub, where Gail disappeared the month before. According to Pamela's friends, Pamela was accompanied at the local pub that evening by an attractive man with shaggy hair before she disappeared. This unknown man would go on to commit suicide a year after Pamela's disappearance and murder, leading her brother Joe to believe that this man was at least someone who was deeply in love or infatuated with Pamela. The next day at around 3:30 p.m. on November 7, 1973, Pamela's remains were found by 17-year-old Frank Almond, who was walking his dog at a nearby park. Her body was found face down in a shallow section of the south bank of Thompson River. Unfortunately, investigators were able to conclude that Pamela met a violent and violating end. She had been sexually assaulted and suffered bite marks on her breast, and she had been brutally beaten and struck numerous times in the head with rocks before ultimately drowning. Initially, the RCMP told the Darlington family that they suspected Ted Bundy of being responsible for Pamela's death. I'm unsure how they even came to this conclusion, but maybe it was because in the 70s, Ted Bundy did take a brief romantic vacation to Vancouver with a partner of his. But Vancouver is about 4 hours from where Pamela was last seen, and there's no real evidence tying Bundy to the crime. Maybe they just wanted to ease the family's pain in some way, because Sharon, Pamela's cousin, did say that following Bundy's execution in 1989, the family felt a sense of relief that the man possibly responsible for Pamela's death was gone. But that relief quickly washed away after the family learned that Pamela's case was actually redirected and added to the E-Pana investigation as her murder fit the criteria, meaning her killer may very well be alive and active. Eventually, investigators came to the conclusion that, like our previous victim, Gail Ways, Pamela may have fallen victim to the deceased convicted rapist and murderer, Bobby Fowler. But obviously, no one can know for sure due to the lack of concrete evidence or confession, so Pamela's case unfortunately joined a long list of unsolved murders. The fifth victim of the E-Pana investigation was 14-year-old Monica Ignace. Monica was a young woman originally from Houston, British Columbia, but her family moved to Terrace, British Columbia in 1973 in a little incorporated community off of Highway 16 called Thornhill. On Friday, December 13, 1974, Monica was last seen at around 11 p.m. walking along Highway 16 on her way back home, but unfortunately, she never made it. 2 eyewitnesses told police they saw a car containing a man and a young girl pulled over on the side of the road the night that Monica disappeared, but nothing ever came of it, and for months, Monica remained missing with no trace. Unfortunately, on April 6, 1975, her decomposing and partially nude body was discovered 3 miles or 6 kilometers northeast of Terrace. It was concluded that little Monica was strangled using her own clothing. No arrests were ever made in connection to her murder, and her case remains unsolved to this day. The 6th victim of today's case is 16-year-old Colleen Macmillan. Colleen was from Lac La Hache, British Columbia, where she lived with her family, and on August 9, 1974, she would leave home, and that would be the last time they ever saw her. Colleen had plans to hang out with her friends that evening and decided to hitchhike along Highway 97 to get to them. But unfortunately, she never even made it, and for weeks, her friends and family did everything they could to search for her. Unfortunately, just a month following her disappearance, on September 4, 1974, Colleen's body was found 29 miles or 47 kilometers south from where she was last seen. Investigators never released the details of Colleen's death, besides the manner, which was homicide, and it wasn't until 2007, a whole 33 years after Colleen's murder, that the DNA retrieved from her body made a match, but unfortunately, the male attached to it remained unidentified. That was until 5 years later in 2012 when the DNA in Colleen's murder case was submitted to Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization, and it matched none other than Bobby Jack Fowler. The same man believed to have assaulted and murdered 2 of our other victims, Gail and Pamela, was proven to be responsible for the murder of Colleen Macmillan, making her our first victim with a solved case in the E-Pana investigation and providing closure for at least one family who has fallen victim to the Highway of Tears. We are well aware, however, that Bobby Fowler died in prison in 2006, so there is no real justice that could ever be served in Colleen's case. But unlike our other 2 victims, we know for sure that he was responsible for her murder, and her family was able to receive at least a sliver of closure. But that closure could never amount to the grief and pain they endured for 38 years. Almost 4 decades of not knowing what really happened to Colleen, and most importantly, why and who was responsible for her untimely departure. And they have had to continue to endure the pain far beyond those decades of not knowing what could have been, living a life with Colleen still here. Our 7th victim is heartbreakingly our youngest victim yet, at just 12 years old, and our 2nd Indigenous victim on the E-Pana list. Monica Jack was last seen on May 6, 1978, as she rode her bike along the highway just outside of Mer, British Columbia, a bike she had just received that day as a long-awaited birthday gift. Her mother, Madeline Lanero, accompanied by her siblings, were the last people to see her alive as they drove alongside her on the highway as Monica rode her bike. Madeline offered her daughter a ride home, an offer that would be politely declined by Monica as she was having a great time riding her bike and insisted that she would be home soon. But unfortunately, Monica would never be seen again, and her bike would be found the very next day near Nicola Lake, just a hill away from her home. Madeline, Monica's mother, recalls the shift in attitude from the RCMP officer investigating Monica's disappearance. She told News that once the officer realized that she was an Indian single mother, he became, quote, quite rude towards her, and his note-taking grew increasingly sloppy, as if he didn't care for the details of the case anymore. For 17 years, Monica's whereabouts would remain unknown until June 2, 1995, when forestry workers discovered a skull along with a few bones laying in a ravine off a logging road on Swacum Mountain. These remains were found 12 miles or 20 kilometers from where Monica was last seen on her bike 17 years ago. And after DNA testing, the remains were revealed to belong to none other than 12-year-old Monica Jack. Like many other cases in the E-Pana investigation, Monica's case sat unsolved for years. But things took a turn in 2014 when a man by the name of Gary Taylor Hanlon confessed to an undercover cop to the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of Monica Jack almost 40 years ago. The undercover officer was a part of what the Canadian police call a Mr. Big operation, which is a procedure conducted by the police to try to elicit confessions from suspects in cold cases by creating a fake criminal organization and getting the suspect to join and confess to the crimes that they already committed. I've heard about this before in a true crime case. Basically, they just pretend to be a part of some crime organization for like human trafficking, drug trafficking, and it ties into cold cases that they're trying to get suspects to confess for. So I think how it goes is they'll be like, I know in the US at least, but they'll try to be like, oh, tell us the crimes that you've committed and tell us if you're really worthy of being a part of our crew. And then like the idiots will sit there and explain how all like in depth all of the crimes they ever committed, and they'll remember the victims' names and what they wore and the day they committed them. And it's just so crazy that it took years for this to happen, decades for this type of stuff to happen. But anyway, at the time, Gary Hanlon was 67 years old when he confessed to the undercover officer not only to Monica Jack's murder, but another little girl, 11-year-old Catherine Mary Herbert. Catherine was actually abducted and murdered in September of 1975. However, her case isn't included in the E-Pana or Highway of Tears investigations. The confession was recorded on both camera and audio, depicting a gruesome story about Monica's abduction, repeated sexual assault, and eventual strangulation. Gary was arrested and charged with the murders of both girls in December of 2014 and was found guilty of first-degree murder in Monica Jack's case on January 17, 2019, when he was 71 years old. Gary Hanlon had a long criminal history with multiple convictions for rape starting in 1969 and going all the way to 1979. All throughout his 20s, Gary was a predator and was released time and time again with more and more opportunities to torment the women and girls of British Columbia. Unfortunately, one of those girls would be 12-year-old Monica Jack just 2 weeks before what would have been her 13th birthday. And even though justice took its time in Monica's case, some of her family was still able to live long enough to see her receive that well-deserved justice and watch the man responsible get put away for the rest of whatever time he had left on this earth. Our 8th victim is 33-year-old Maureen Mosey. Maureen was last seen on May 8th of 1981 as she was hitchhiking from Salmon Arm to Kamloops. Witnesses told police they saw her get in a car with a man who looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s with dark hair and a beard. The following day, on May 9th, Maureen's body was discovered by a woman walking her dog near the intersection of Highway 97 and Highway 1, just 10 miles or 16 kilometers east of Kamloops. Maureen had been savagely beaten to death by someone who remains unknown to this very day, and her case remains unsolved. Our 9th victim of the E-Pana investigation is Shelly Ann Baxu, a young 16-year-old girl from Hinton, Alberta. Shelly Ann was last seen on May 3, 1983, as she was walking down Alberta's section of Highway 16 on her way home from her babysitting job at her boyfriend's brother's house in Sunset Trailer Park. Shelly Ann lived in a little secluded home about 4 miles or 6.5 kilometers from her babysitting job, and at around 8 p.m., she made a phone call home to her mother just before leaving. She let her mom know that she would be home in about 15 minutes as she was getting a ride from a friend, and she requested that her mother make her some pasta for when she made it home. But unfortunately, Shelley never made it home to share that meal with her mother, and it wasn't until around 9 p.m. when Sally, her mother, noticed that she didn't make it home after Shelley's boyfriend called the house wanting to speak with her before the night was over. Now, although Shelley's family immediately reported her missing, the RCMP informed them that a formal report would not be able to be completed until 24 hours had passed since her last sighting. So the family was left to search along the route she took to and from work themselves, unfortunately turning up with nothing. On May 7, 1983, almost a week after Shelley's disappearance, a bunch of her belongings were found on the banks of the Athabasca River along Highway 40. Her jacket, a bra, a pair of pantyhose, a student card, and a library book that was checked out on May 3rd, the day of her disappearance, were all found, but still no trace of Shelley Ann. Investigators began to suspect foul play in her disappearance rather than her being a runaway, especially since blood droplets were found on a few articles of her clothing. But unfortunately, Shelley has never been seen or heard from since the day she disappeared, and there has been no information given surrounding her disappearance despite the $50,000 reward her family has offered for any help in her case. This loss wasn't even the only one her mother endured, unfortunately, because Tim, Shelley's brother, passed away from cancer following her disappearance. However, Sally finds solace in the idea that her children are possibly reunited once again, that Tim no longer has to endure the pain of his illness and the pain of life without his sister, and Shelley is no longer without her family. Shelley Ann would have been 59 years old today. Our 10th victim of the E-Pana investigation is 24-year-old Alberta Gail Williams, and our third Indigenous victim on the list. Alberta was originally from Prince Rupert, a small yet major city in British Columbia, and she and her family are members of the Gitskin tribe of Gitineau, a small village almost 3 hours from Prince Rupert. But around the time of her case, Alberta had begun staying in Vancouver with her sister Claudia in an apartment that they shared. Vancouver was a 2-hour plane ride or 17-hour car ride from Prince Rupert, a trip that was often taken amongst the sisters and other locals, as it was common for people to travel back north for seasonal jobs such as the BC Packers plant, a popular salmon cannery. Eventually, Alberta met the man that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with, and at 24 years old, she was engaged and living with her partner in Vancouver, moving out of her shared apartment with her sister. On Friday, August 25th of 1989, it was the last day of work for Alberta and Claudia, who were back home in Prince Rupert working at the Packers plant. And with a little extra money in their pockets, the sisters decided to celebrate their last day of work at Bogey's Cabaret. The bar sat in the Prince Rupert Hotel along the route of Highway 16 and was a very popular staple in the town. Locals often went there to unwind and enjoy the company of one another after a long week of work. Now, Alberta wasn't much of a partier and rarely drank, according to her family. But this night, she was especially excited to enjoy her last night in Prince Rupert before returning to her normal routine in Vancouver, and she wanted to savor every moment with her friends and family. Claudia, her sister, recalls the lighthearted and bubbly mood that Alberta was in that night and how packed the bar was as well. So packed she couldn't even get a seat next to her sister. But the night carried on, with Claudia occasionally checking on Alberta, and everyone having a great time all the way until closing time. Once the bar was closed, over 100 patrons flooded the streets wanting to continue their night, including Alberta and her group of friends. She tried convincing her sister Claudia to come join them at a house party, but before Claudia could make the decision, she was interrupted by her ex-boyfriend, who was desperate to speak with her. And eventually the sisters were separated as Alberta went with her friends and Claudia was left speaking to her ex, who she had no intention of leaving with or mending things with. After the brief conversation, Claudia noticed that her sister was gone and searched the area for about 30 minutes before making her way home, assuming that Alberta was safe and sound with her friends. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and Alberta never returned home that night, and not even the next day. The family grew increasingly concerned as the days passed and Alberta failed to contact anyone or use her ticket to return home to Vancouver, and a missing persons report was filed a couple days after her disappearance. But just 3 weeks later, her family's fears would come true. On September 25th, 1989, 24-year-old Alberta Williams' body was found by hikers just east of Prince Rupert along Highway 16. Alberta was lying face down in a ditch with shrubs and debris covering her. She was partially nude, wearing only her bra and blouse, and it was apparent she had been sexually assaulted and strangled, resulting in her death. Her family was absolutely devastated, but Claudia and later investigators believed that they knew who was responsible. Shockingly, that person that they suspected was Alberta's uncle. The night Alberta went missing, friends and family members were called to investigators that her uncle, who was with her at the bar, Bogey's Cabaret, was acting more like a protective boyfriend that night rather than a family member. And it was his house that Alberta and her friends were going to when they mentioned leaving for a house party. The uncle's wife and son were out of town that weekend, so it made it easy to have company over for more drinks. At some point in the night, Alberta, her uncle, and her younger sister's boyfriend loaded into a black pickup truck and decided to head to Prince Rupert. They stopped at Alberta's cousin Amanda's house to borrow $20 for gas in order to make it back home, and that was the last time Alberta was ever seen. Her cousin Amanda said that Alberta was extremely intoxicated when she saw her that night, so much so that she needed to be helped in and out of the trunk when she went to go use the restroom. And as we can remember, Alberta wasn't much of a drinker, so this was extremely unusual and alarming. But Amanda assumed she was in good hands because she was with people who were supposed to be family, her uncle and her sister's boyfriend. Following the discovery of Alberta's body, her uncle became evasive and less cooperative with police. But due to lack of evidence, the investigators were unable to obtain a search warrant for the uncle's home, and with no other suspects or leads, Alberta's case grew cold. Unfortunately, to this day, Alberta's murder has remained open and unsolved like many of our other victims. She was laid to rest in Gatineau, where her tribe originates from, next to her late sister, Pamela. And I just want to add real quick, Pamela is not the same Pamela as one of our victims previously. This is a different Pamela, her actual sister. So that was Pamela Darlington, one of our victims, and this is Pamela, I believe her last name is Williams, because that's Alberta's last name, but I wasn't sure of that. But I do know that they are two different Pamelas, so don't get confused. Our 11th victim of today's case is 15-year-old Delphine Nicol, the fourth Indigenous victim of the E-Pana investigation. Delphine was the youngest in her family, and they all lived in a small city called Smithers in British Columbia. Delphine was an adventurous and loving child, but did face a couple of hardships growing up, one major event being the loss of her father when she was just 11 years old. And devastation wasn't quite done with Delphine, unfortunately, because just 4 years later, at 15 years old, her mother Judy fell ill after complications from a surgery. Judy was left in a coma for 4 months at a hospital in Prince George, about 4 hours from where she had lived with Delphine. But luckily for the mother-daughter duo, Delphine's uncle lived just across the street from the hospital, and that is where she moved in order to be closer to her mother to support her during this trying time. On Wednesday, June 13th, 1990, 15-year-old Delphine made her way into town to meet up with some friends at around 2 p.m. The group of 4 young girls made their way around the town from that afternoon into the evening, and as their day slowly came to an end, Delphine asked her friends if they wanted to spend the night. This was a strange suggestion according to the friends, as Delphine had never asked before, but they politely declined due to having school and work the following day. So the girls said their goodbyes and parted ways, and this would be the last time the friends would ever see Delphine ever again. Delphine was last seen hitchhiking her way home along the eastbound lane of Highway 16, but she never made it home. When Delphine's family went to report her missing, they were met with an unfavorable attitude from officers as they believed she was just a runaway and would probably make her way home whenever she wanted to. This idea was highly discouraged by her family because Judy, her mother, was still very sick and Delphine wouldn't have taken off without being able to see her every day. Also, if you remember, Delphine invited her friends to spend the night the day she went missing, so obviously she had no intention of running away. But unfortunately to officers, this sort of behavior was expected out of the teenager because of her small rap sheet of petty criminal behavior such as mischief and theft. Delphine was also in and out of local youth facilities in the province, so police assumed she was just another troubled teen who ran away from home and would possibly turn up somewhere in Vancouver, as most missing teens did around this time. With little to no support from the police, Delphine's family was left to search for her on their own. They asked around their town and even made their way all the way up to Vancouver, knocking door to door for any information regarding the whereabouts of Delphine and if she even made it to Vancouver, which would have been a little over an 8-hour drive south of Prince George where she was living and went missing from. Days turned to weeks, and then months, and then years without a trace from Delphine. Eventually, CanPro Investigation Services, as well as Missing Children Society of Canada, joined Delphine's family in the search. A gas station employee at the Mohawk gas station where she and her friends parted ways told investigators that Delphine got into a red sports car the night that she disappeared. However, this lead ran cold, along with another that suggested that Delphine made her way to Smithers for a house party, and that is where she went missing. Her own uncle was even investigated, but all evidence pointed to the fact that Delphine just truly never made it home. Unfortunately, Delphine has remained missing to this day. But there is a local theory and suspicion that is not widely known to the public, and it's that a police officer was involved in Delphine's disappearance. According to those who knew Delphine and lived in the area that she went missing from, a police officer was infatuated with Delphine. This officer often stalked the young girl, often showing up wherever she was at, offering her rides to and from home, and even offering to buy her things. Delphine's family insisted that the police investigate the officer, but were consistently turned down. And 10 years later, when clothing with human remains intertwined in them was uncovered, Delphine's family didn't even get the chance to identify the clothing, as it all mysteriously disappeared, leading to yet another sense of false hope and heartbreak for Delphine's family, and leaving them with nothing to this day. Delphine would have been 51 years old today. And also, side note, Delphine's cousin, Cecilia Nickel, is also a victim of the Highway of Tears. She was also 15 around the time she went missing in 1989. She went missing in October of 1989. According to some people, she went to Vancouver to visit her mom, and then she left to go live on the streets. And from then, they never heard from her, never seen her. So yeah, it wasn't just Delphine that this family lost, but also her cousin Cecilia, and I feel absolutely horrible for the family. I believe Cecilia would have been about 51 or 52 years old around this time too. The 12th victim of the E-Pana investigation is 16-year-old Ramona Wilson, a young teen from Smithers, British Columbia, and also our 5th Indigenous victim on the list. Ramona was the youngest of 6 children and was a bubbly and well-liked teenager with big aspirations and goals for herself, one of them being to become the first in her family to attend university and become a psychologist. Around the time that Ramona went missing in June, it was a pretty hectic and festive time for the teens of Smithers, as it was graduation weekend. On Saturday, June 11, 1994, Ramona was especially happy as she danced around the house getting ready for her night out with her friends, according to her mother, Matilda. Ramona left at around 9:45 p.m. to meet up with her best friend, Crystal Grenke. However, Crystal was preoccupied attending her brother's graduation ceremony, so she arranged for her and Ramona to meet at the dance in Hazelton, a town about 43 miles or 70 kilometers away from Smithers, which would be about an hour drive. But as Crystal arrived and enjoyed her time at the dance, she noticed as time went on that Ramona was nowhere to be found. It was assumed by the best friend that Ramona had simply stopped at her boyfriend's house, which was on the way to Hazelton, just halfway into the journey from Smithers. The town was known as Morristown, but is known as Whitsett today. The following morning, Ramona's boyfriend called her family home in hopes of getting in contact with her. But her mother informed the young man that Ramona was at her best friend Crystal's house to her knowledge. But after a slew of phone calls to Crystal, Ramona's job, and her mother, it was determined by her loved ones that Ramona went missing, and that concern was further solidified when she failed to return to school on Monday, June 13th. Unfortunately, like in our previous case, police officers were adamant that Ramona was a runaway and that maybe she wasn't so happy at home, so they suggested that the family, quote, give it some time. But of course, like any other family would, they took it upon themselves to conduct the search for Ramona. A week passed with no activity from Ramona. No changes in her bank account, no activity at her job, which had a paycheck with her name on it waiting for her, and certainly no activity from her near her home. And this is where the RCMP began their investigation into her missing persons case. And the Missing Children Society of Canada supported Ramona's family with searches and reward money. On April 9, 1995, 10 months following Ramona's disappearance, 2 teen boys were four-wheeling off of Yellock Road, just north of Highway 16 behind the Smithers Airport, when one of their ATVs got lodged in the mud. The boys ventured into the nearby woods to try to find something to help dislodge their ATV, and it was there that they discovered the remains of 16-year-old Ramona Wilson. Ramona laid there nude, her leggings and purple sweatshirt found nearby, along with yellow rope and nylon cables. Upon the gruesome discovery of Ramona's body, the coroner concluded that her death was in fact a homicide, but the details surrounding her death remained private. Ramona's family was left not only stripped of their hope, but devastated, and their questions remained unanswered to this day. Investigators did some digging into what could have happened to Ramona, but all leads led them back to square one, still uncertain of what occurred the night she went missing. To this day, the information regarding Ramona's disappearance and murder are unknown, and her killer is still out there, somewhere hiding a dark secret. Since Ramona's passing, her mother Matilda and older sister Brenda have found an inclusive and noble way to honor not only her memory, but all of those who have gone missing or been murdered. Every June for the past 33 years, Ramona's family, along with many others in the community, walk along Highway 16 from Lake Catherine to Yellock Road, the same road where Ramona's body was found. The annual walk is so much more than just a tribute to Ramona and other missing and murdered young women. It's also a constant reminder of the gruesome crimes that occur along Highway 16 and a call to action for law enforcement and citizens to pay attention to the ongoing issue of danger young women face in British Columbia. Our 13th victim of the E-Pana investigation and 6th Indigenous victim is Roxanne Tierra. Roxanne was originally from Manitoba, Canada, the neighboring province of Ontario, but she spent most of her childhood bouncing around from house to house in the foster care system. Eventually, she was placed under the care of Mildred Tierra in a loving and supportive home in Quesnel, British Columbia. Mildred went on to obtain legal guardianship of Roxanne and did her best to give her the life that she deserved. She remembers Roxanne as a really happy, bubbly, and good kid despite all the things she's been through. But unfortunately, as she got older, Roxanne began to struggle with going to school consistently and fell into the wrong crowd of teenagers. When Roxanne was 12 years old, she was convicted and incarcerated for a petty crime and spent some time in a juvenile detention center. According to her former brother-in-law, this event was, quote, the worst thing that ever happened to her, and following her release, she went wild. Roxanne struggled to integrate back into society upon her release and ended up spending most of her time in Williams Lake, a town next to Quesnel, where Mildred and the rest of her family lived. She became addicted to drugs and partook in survival sex, which is exactly what it sounds like. A form of sex trafficking that people relied on to stay alive in the streets. Despite her circumstances, Roxanne stayed in contact with her mother and often visited her or called her on the phone. In late June of 1994, when she was just 15 years old, she told her family that she wanted nothing more than to get clean and eventually achieve her dreams of becoming a fashion designer. She even made an appointment at one point to enter a drug treatment program. But unfortunately, the last time Mildred or anyone in the family would see Roxanne was on June 27, 1994, and July would be the last time she was seen by anyone ever again. Her last known location was Prince George, about 2.5 hours north of Williams Lake, where she usually stayed. Mildred and the family searched for signs of Roxanne everywhere. They put up flyers, went to the police, and did everything they could to locate Roxanne and give her another chance at life. Unfortunately, Roxanne's body would be found a month after her last sighting on August 17, 1994. She was found in a bush along Highway 16, just about 4 miles or 6 kilometers east of a town called Burns Lake. Officers released Roxanne's photo to the public in hopes of getting any information regarding the last time she was seen or if anyone knew anything about her murder. About 40 tips were called in to investigators, but no leads led to any arrests or suspects, and Roxanne's family was left to mourn the loss of their daughter and sister with no justice. The 14th and 7th Indigenous victim of today's case is Alicia Germain, better known as Leah by her loved ones. Leah was a young girl from Prince George who's remembered as an affectionate and kind young girl by her mother, Deborah. But she was dealing with a very tumultuous home life, causing her to put on a tough front even though she was really a teddy bear inside. Leah ended up running away from home when she was 12 years old and spent some time in a homeless/troubled youth center. One of the employees at the center recalled Leah as a kind of loner and said she was very independent and tough, making it difficult for her to be fostered by families or make any friends. By 1994, Leah ended up leading a life on the streets, using drugs and falling victim to sex trafficking. It was during this time where she actually met our last victim, Roxanne, before her disappearance and tragic murder, and the two actually became friends. I believe the two girls bonded over their desire to get their lives back on track and get off the streets, especially because Leah, who was also 15 at the time, was trying to get clean and get back into school, where she would have picked back up in 10th grade. Unfortunately, as we know, Roxanne went missing and ended up murdered in mid-August, and sadly, so would Leah. On Friday, December 9th, 1994, Leah was last seen at the Prince George Native Friendship Center. The center is home to a nonprofit organization that caters to Aboriginal people in need within urban areas of Canada. This specific center was holding their annual Christmas party for youth on the streets, and over 150 kids were in attendance, including Leah. One of the employees remembered that after dinner, Leah told everyone that she would be leaving for just a moment with her cousin and to save one of the donated gifts for when she returned. But heartbreakingly enough, she would never make it back to get that gift. Later that night at around 11 p.m., a couple of kids were walking behind Haldie Road Elementary School on the outskirts of Prince George along Highway 16 when they stumbled upon the body of Leah Germain. The poor 15-year-old girl had been stabbed to death and left alone in the brutal Canadian cold to die. No arrests have ever been made in this now 32-year-old cold case, and despite finding the DNA of an unidentified female, law enforcement has been unable to discover the identity of this young woman or anyone involved in Leah's murder. The 15th victim and 8th Indigenous young woman on our list is 19-year-old Lana Derrick. Lana was originally from Terrace, British Columbia, and her family belonged to the Gittinyao tribe, the same tribe that our 10th victim, 24-year-old Alberta, belonged to. Lana was remembered by her family as a sweet and fun young woman, and the good kind of troublemaker who indulged in light-hearted pranks. Lana was an ambitious young woman who was dedicated to giving herself a better life after she graduated high school, going on to enroll in the forestry program at Northwest Community College, as she had a great love for the outdoors. On the day Lana was last seen, Friday, November 17, 1995, she was stopping at her stepsister's apartment to pick up some cash. According to her stepsister Clarice, Lana arrived at her place at around 3 a.m. and seemed a little intoxicated, but in good spirits. She invited her stepsister out to party, but the invitation was politely declined as it was already 3 a.m. and Clarice, along with her younger sister, were already in bed for the night. The two sisters parted ways after Clarice gave Lana $30 that her father left for her, and the two said their goodbyes. Clarice recalls not seeing any cars, headlights, or any indication that Lana was riding with anyone when she arrived. The following day, on Saturday, November 18th, Lana's parents noticed that her belongings were still at the house and untouched, but they figured she stayed at a friend's house, and since she rarely came home over the weekend, they weren't really alarmed until Tuesday, November 21st, when there were still no signs of Lana, who was supposed to resume classes at Northwestern, and she never missed school. Her family discovered that no one had seen or heard from Lana since 3 days prior, and the search for her began. Family, friends, members of the community, law enforcement, everyone rallied together to search for Lana for days. Eventually, police decided to call the search off as they weren't getting anywhere in the search or the investigation. But Lana's mother, Marge, told them that they could stop their search, but the family refuses to, and they would go on to continue their search with or without assistance from law enforcement. A month after Lana's disappearance was revealed to the public, one witness came forward to report the last sighting of Lana at around 3:30 a.m. The witness saw Lana at a Petro-Canada gas station in Thornhill on the south side of Highway 16, which is about an 8-minute drive across the river from where Lana was last seen at her sister's apartment. Lana appeared to have been riding with somebody in a blue car. She exited the vehicle to go into the gas station and then returned to the car, and whoever she was accompanied by drove into the night. Unfortunately, the security footage from that night had already been recorded over, so investigators were unable to see for themselves who Lana may have been with or the type of vehicle she was last seen in. Police sketches were made of 2 men, however, men suspected to be in the vehicle with Lana the night of her disappearance. But nothing came from the sketches. No tips, no revealing of identities, nothing. But investigators would learn that Lana's supposed boyfriend at the time did have an alarming past. This boyfriend was apparently dating her stepsister Clarice at one point in time, but the two split following a drunken altercation between the couple, one in which the boyfriend got aggressive with Clarice, leading her to break things off. Investigators would have loved the chance to be able to speak with this boyfriend, but unfortunately they would learn that the morning after Lana's disappearance over a month ago, this boyfriend committed suicide. Now, I would think that this had something to do with Lana's disappearance, but according to them, his death and Lana's disappearance didn't have any clear connection, and this is where Lana's story comes to an end. To this day, her whereabouts are still unknown, and Lana would have been 50 years old today. Our 16th victim in today's case is Nicole Hoare, a 25-year-old young woman from Red Deer, Alberta. Nicole worked as a tree planter in northern British Columbia, but during her spring break in June of 2002, she made plans to go home and surprise her mother and sister with a visit. Nicole had a total 370-kilometer or 229-mile travel from her approximate location near Prince George all the way to Smithers. The trip would take 4.5, almost 5 hours to complete, and her sole mode of transportation was hitchhiking. On June 21, 2002, Nicole would begin her journey to Smithers. Witnesses stated that she had spoken about a potential ride from a man traveling with his children, but that was the last anyone had ever heard from Nicole. Unfortunately, Nicole would never make it to her destination, and since her appearance was supposed to be a surprise, her mother and sister had no idea she was even missing. It wasn't until 6 days after her disappearance on June 27, 2002, when she was officially reported missing as she had been absent from work. When the news of Nicole's disappearance spread throughout the province, a massive outpour of support and action took place. The RCMP, along with 170 volunteers, took to the land between Prince George and Smithers and canvassed over 24,000 square kilometers or 9,266 square miles looking for Nicole. Roadways, campsites, trails, every possible place was searched for Nicole. Even the use of aircraft was brought out to search from above. But despite being the largest coordinated search in British Columbian history, Nicole Hoare was never found. Now, this level of concern and action was extremely necessary and well-deserved, but to some people, especially the Indigenous population in British Columbia, it was jarring and honestly disrespectful. Nicole would be the 16th confirmed victim of the Highway of Tears, but the Indigenous population couldn't shake the idea that the immense care and use of resources was due to the fact that Nicole was a white woman. There were far more Indigenous women and especially young Indigenous girls who were missing or turned up murdered along this road and continue to fall victim, but they were treated as if their life didn't matter, as if their life held less value to their white counterparts. However, due to the attention from Nicole's disappearance, the cases of all the Highway of Tears victims began to receive national attention as the frightening pattern of disappearance and murders began to reveal a troubling issue going on in British Columbia. To this day, Nicole Hoare is still missing. Only a couple of leads have ever been found in regards to her disappearance, the most notable being the investigation of Leland Vincent Switzer. Switzer was a man whose land was searched in the district of Isle Pierre, just west of British Columbia, because just 2 days following Nicole's disappearance, he murdered his own brother, and since then, his land has been an unauthorized dumping ground. Nevertheless, Nicole still has not been found, leaving her family incomplete and desperate for answers for the last 24 years. Nicole would have been 49 years old today. Our 17th and 9th Indigenous victim of the E-Pana investigation is 22-year-old Tamara Lynn Chipman. Tamara was originally from Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and was a member of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. Tamara is remembered by her family as a lively and fiery young woman who always stood up for herself and didn't back down from anything or anyone. She and her family moved to Terrace, British Columbia following the devastating loss of their grandfather Jack, and this is where she spent most of her teenage years. At the age of 19, Tamara gave birth to her son Jaden, and although she loved him dearly, her family noticed the toll being a single mother took on her throughout Jaden's developmental years. Her mother, Corey, stated that she was worried about her daughter and feared she had been doing drugs and may have fallen into a bad crowd. During her time in Terrace, Tamara's parents split up, leading to her mother returning back to Prince Rupert and her father staying in Terrace. Tamara stayed in Terrace, but this did not prevent her from staying in contact with her mother, as she often traveled the hour and a half between the two cities. The last time Tamara would be making this trip would be September 21st, 2005. Tamara had been in Prince Rupert visiting her mother for a few days and decided to make her way back home. This time would be a little different and a little more difficult, however, because her car broke down just a few weeks prior. A good friend of Tamara's father was the last to see her as she hitchhiked eastward on Highway 16 towards Terrace. She was in Industrial Park, a city just outside of Prince Rupert. Unfortunately, Tamara would be missing for months before anyone in her family would suspect she was gone or in any sort of danger. Her father, Tom, was a fisherman, and during fishing season, he would be gone for long periods of time with very little to no communication with his daughter. And with little to no communication with her family in Prince Rupert, unless she was physically there, both families assumed she was with the other during those months. It didn't help that Tamara was also facing assault charges, so most people assumed she just went off the grid to avoid sentencing. In November, once Tom returned home, he realized no one heard from Tamara and that there had been no physical signs of her either. Her rent had gone neglected, her bank accounts remained untouched for months, and no one had seen or heard from her in what seemed like forever. On November 15, 2005, Tamara was officially reported missing to the RCMP by her father, and both Terrace and Prince Rupert police forces aided the investigation and search for Tamara. For over 2 months, Tamara's family and law enforcement searched for her, from Terrace to Prince Rupert and even all the way to Vancouver, and unfortunately there were no signs of her anywhere. The investigation regarding Tamara's disappearance also led to many disappointing dead ends. There were many leads that led to little to no improvement in the case, except for one. At some point in the investigation, 2 men accompanied by a woman came forward to the RCMP. The witnesses who remained unnamed to the public came forward with some shocking and sickening information. According to the women of the group, they all noticed Tamara hitchhiking along Highway 16. They offered her a ride as they were also on their way towards Terrace, and Tamara accepted. At some point during the car ride towards Terrace, Tamara and one of the men got into a heated altercation, one in which resulted in the man hitting Tamara before going on to strangle her to death in the car. The group then pulled over to the side of the road in a remote area along the highway and then dragged Tamara's body out of the car and dumped her on the side of the road. But according to the woman, the man who killed her came back to move her body further into the forest to fully conceal her body. After receiving this information, the RCMP officers took to the location where the witness alleged that Tamara's murder took place. With the help of cadaver dogs, they canvassed the area for any sign of Tamara's body, but they found nothing. Tamara's case would take an even more devastating turn, as all 3 witnesses who alleged to this crime wound up dead shortly after the statement. Tamara would have been 43 years old today, and her son is about 23 years old at the time of this episode. She is severely missed by those who had the pleasure to know her, and it's a travesty that her son barely got the chance to. Tamara is still considered missing regardless of the alleged murder confession due to the lack of physical evidence following the confession, but unfortunately, the RCMP officials are almost certain they know what happened to her. And finally, our 18th victim, who also ends the E-Pana list as our 10th Indigenous victim, is 14-year-old Ayla Ogier. Ayla was the youngest of 6 children and lived in Prince George with her family who belonged to the Clately Tene tribe. The family moved around fairly often throughout their lives and at some points ended up separated, but all 6 siblings and their mother always remained close and had a tight-knit bond. But Ayla would be separated from her family for the last time on February 2nd, 2006. That day, Ayla, along with her brother Tim and sister Kyla, took a trip to the Pine Center Mall, a mall that sat only 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles away from the family home and one of the biggest malls in Prince George at the time. It was pretty common for teens to hang out at the Pine Center Mall, like most of us can relate to growing up. The mall has always been one of the best places to hang out with friends. As the siblings arrived, they ran into a group of Ayla and Kyla's friends, and the young teens made plans to go out drinking that night. Now, the legal age to drink in British Columbia, and I think all of Canada, is 19 years old. Ayla was only 14 years old at the time, and I'd like to assume that her friends were about the same age, so I'm unsure how they planned to get away with this plan of drinking underage, but I was underage before. I know the tactics and the lengths that young people go to have some drinks and enjoy a weekend with their friends, so I'm not judging her at all. But unfortunately, this is where the details of Ayla's story start to get fuzzy. Tim declined the invitation to go out drinking with the young girls, returning home after the hangout at the mall, and Ayla and Kyla eventually got separated during their night out with the friends. When Kyla arrived home early the following morning, she expected to find her sister Ayla already there, but was left dumbfounded when her sister was nowhere to be found. The Ogier family spent the entire day retracing Ayla's steps, but all efforts were left in vain, so the family turned to the RCMP the following day on Friday, February 3rd, for assistance. Like in most of our cases from today, the RCMP frustratingly told Audrey Ogier, Ayla's mother, that she should wait another 78 hours to wait and see if Ayla would return home on her own, and if not, then they could file a missing persons report. And there would still be no sign of Ayla by February 6th, and an official missing persons report was filed for the 14-year-old girl. Searches were conducted all around the town, flyers were put up, and the family worked tirelessly for days on end trying to find their girl. But unfortunately, the search would come to a devastating end on February 10th, 2006. Just a little over a week since she was last seen at the mall with her friends, the body of 14-year-old Ayla Ogier was discovered in a ditch along Highway 16 near Tabor Mountain. Her body was found about 23 kilometers or 14 miles east of downtown Prince George. Ayla was completely nude, stripped of everything except a necklace around her neck that her mother had gifted to her. Her cause of death was ruled a homicide, and the manner was blunt force trauma to her head. Ayla's family was absolutely crushed by the news of her passing and wanted officers to do everything in their power to find out what exactly happened to her and who could have possibly done something like this to their sweet Ayla. But sadly, there weren't many leads that they could follow. It is alleged by officers that Ayla spent the rest of her night with her friends and then decided to go to her friend's house to get a ride home from that friend's mother. Apparently, the friend's mom was unable to give her a ride home, and without wanting to disturb her own mother, as it was very late, Ayla decided to find her way home on her own, walking towards a known drug house in the area. Surveillance footage from the areas where Ayla made her way home captured her walking on the 2100th block of Quint Street. She passed a Save on Foods gas bar at around 1 a.m. before making her way further down the road. Witnesses from the day she left the mall also allege that she was last seen getting into a black van, but nothing has ever come from these leads. For years since Ayla's murder, Audrey and her family have organized a walk called the Highway of Hope, where they walk along Highway 16 from where Ayla's body was found all the way to where she was finally laid to rest. Similar to what Ramona's family organized and has participated in for decades, the family continues to raise awareness and honor the missing and murdered young Indigenous women who have fallen victim to the Highway of Tears. Audrey Ogier, the matriarch of the family, was only able to participate in a handful of honor walks as she also passed away, sadly, on March 5th, 2013 at just 48 years old. Audrey was involved in a fatal 2-car collision on Highway 16 near Nojack, Alberta. The Highway of Hope Walk now also honors Audrey as well as her daughter and the many, many other young Indigenous women who have lost their lives or disappeared along the Highway of Tears. As we bring this case to a close, I would like us to take a moment to remember each of the young women we spoke about today and take the time to appreciate how much time we have been given on this earth and all the privileges we've been blessed with, no matter how big or small. Something as simple as having public transportation could have saved most, if not all, of these young women's lives. And that is something, as well as having cars, that we all take for granted every day. I would also like for us to think about their families. I hope that none of them blame themselves for anything that happened to these young women. There is a much bigger issue that needs to be addressed, and people who actually deserve the blame. I hope all 18 girls are at peace, and I hope their families have the support and love that they need and deserve to get through the rest of their lives until they are all reunited once again. Now, before we get into the next part of today's episode, I think it's extremely important for me to leave you all with some resources regarding the case, as it's unfortunately still ongoing. Even though our last victim's murder took place in 2006, there are still dozens of cases surrounding the Highway of Tears, the most recent one being just 3 years ago in 2023. So if you could help in any way or have any information that could be useful, please call 1-877-543-4822 for the E-Pana investigation tip line to try to bring the girls in today's case with unsolved cases to justice. Again, that is 877-543-4822. And if you are a resident of Canada, you can visit the highwayoftears.org/community safety toolkit for resources on how to stay safe and identify risk as you're traveling along Highway 16 and other major highways. You can also call 1-800-222-8477 for Canada's Crime Stoppers Division. If you know or think you saw something, please say something. But of course, in the case of an emergency, always call 911. Okay, so we're now in the part of our episode where we do our police/detective rating and our judge/jury rating. Obviously, there's no judge or jury in this case, so it will only be focused on the police and detectives. And I think you guys know exactly what they're about to get, so I don't even think I have to say anything. The police work in this case was absolute hot garbage, so I don't even want to give them a rating, but if I absolutely have to, if you guys are forcing me, if you're gonna just twist my arm behind my back, then I will be giving them an F-. One of my episodes I did an F- and somebody was like, that's not even real, like F, nothing can be lower than an F. It's my damn scale and I'm gonna give whatever damn rating I want to give it. So a 5-, so F- for this police work. And that's the absolute lowest that anybody can get, an F-. And they absolutely deserve that. I don't know why back in the day they used to say that people had to be missing for 3 days before you could report them missing. And a majority of our victims were so young. So I don't understand how they thought that somebody's 14, 12, 10-year-old child could be missing. And they're like, oh, give her 3 days. That just screams, oh, just give us time to not really have to look for somebody. Let's just look for her body instead. That's insane. If it were your child, would you want them somewhere out in the world for 3 days with no idea of the state of their well-being? I think that's a major flaw in a lot of law enforcement jobs. Some of these people see death and gore every single day, so they build this shell around their hearts to kind of block off any empathy. And I'm like, if you had a sliver of empathy, these people were coming to you like, please, our babies are missing. We need help. Please do something. And just like a little sliver of you wasn't like, okay, let me try my best. You were like, come back in 78 hours, maybe 72, if you really care. Like, do your fucking job. And this is honestly just a huge problem going on in the world, and it's only getting worse. People just lack empathy and sympathy, and it disgusts me to my core. I cannot imagine walking around with only cares about myself. And maybe people like that don't even care about themselves, so that's why they can't bring themselves to care about other people. But it's just so sad. And if you lack empathy, you can't be in these type of jobs. I'm sorry. Like, genuinely. I know it's very mentally demanding and draining and traumatizing, but if you can't still be human at the end of the day, you do not deserve to be in these lines of work. So yeah, obviously I don't work in law enforcement, so I don't really know the process or paperwork that goes into filing a missing persons report. And I'm sure it's annoying for people on the outside to be like, oh, it's just a report, it's just a piece of paper. I'm sure it's a real process, and it really has to be a full thing that goes into reporting someone missing. But what is really the difference in doing it 3 days rather than on day one? And it's even more bogus because we know now that you don't have a time restraint to file someone missing. Like, you could think that someone was missing for 20 minutes and you can report them missing. So that was never real in the first place. So what, like, where did that even come from? Was there like a backlog once upon a time where they were just like, no, there's just too many people missing? And if that's the case, get your ass out and work. Like, people should not be missing for there to be this backlog. And oh my God, we don't have enough manpower and there's not enough help. Get the up and work. And it really breaks my heart that we have to even make this a race thing, but it is just kind of blatantly obvious. Like, even down to my research on the case, I just feel like the whole E-Pana investigation was started. So they started it and said, okay, we have all these people going missing on Highway 16, the Highway of Tears. Let's take a handful of them out of this investigation and start our own smaller one. But then they added highways 4 and 25 and 69 and 32 and 89. Like, how are you going to add a bunch of other highways? That makes no sense. And then I feel like the only reason that happened was so that they could be like, see, it's not just a bunch of Indigenous women. And still, at the end of the day, it was majority Indigenous people. It was 8 white women and then 10 Indigenous women. That's still disproportionate. That's still insane. But I feel like they did that to be like, see, it's not just a bunch of Indigenous girls. There's also white women disappearing too. Like, it's just a women problem. It's not just a women problem. It's the fact that Canada needs to be real for 5 seconds and confront an issue that's extremely apparent. I just think it's really unfair that they did that. Like, I get it. Maybe they had more reasoning behind it. Maybe it wasn't solely off the basis of, oh, it's not even just Indigenous women, it's white women too. But it really feels like a slap in the face, in my opinion, that they were like, oh, let's take out this handful of women that have gone missing, because they still didn't really do anything with that information. There's still just the Highway of Tears that's ongoing to this day, and then a separate E-Pana investigation that ended in 2006? Is that my last case? That's crazy. And I feel like they did that to be like, oh, there's also white women too. Like, they added a bunch of other white women on the list too. There was still a majority of Indigenous women missing, and their lives do matter. So please do better. But this kind of takes me into my next part of my theories. So this is all 1,000,000,000% alleged, but part of me feels like the RCMP or some people on the task force are or have been involved in some of these cases, or there's some sort of corruption where these cases regarding Indigenous victims are glossed over. Like, if we look back at Delphine's case, many people suspect an officer being involved with her due to the pursuit and stalking that she faced by one of the officers. And not only that, but the alleged evidence that was recovered but then somehow lost was just so bizarre. And I wouldn't be surprised if the lack of care was because officers knew of some sort of involvement or were involved themselves. And then I also have a theory that there were multiple serial killers. If it wasn't just because there were multiple serial killers, period, it was probably because one serial killer was acting, nothing was really being done, he was never caught, and then there were probably just a bunch of copycats. They're probably just like, I wouldn't be surprised because according to Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, like the actual group, they say that the Highway of Tears has like over 1,000 victims. Like, this has been happening for a very long time. There's no way that one person is out there doing all this. And you can't kill 1,000 people in like 20 years. Let's be realistic. A man is murdering people from 20 something, let's say 25 until he's probably 60. That's a good chunk of time, but not enough to kill thousands, hundreds, almost over 1,000 women. That's insane. And then you don't get caught ever. You don't get any mutilations from probably someone retaliating. Like, it can't be one person. So I feel like there's either one serial killer. Okay, my real theory is that there's one serial killer who's been abducting women on the weekends, because a majority of our victims go missing Friday or Saturday. And then I feel like there's a copycat serial killer. And then I just feel like there's other serial killers, just period. And they only feel more bold and more enabled to do this because I feel like nothing has happened. Nobody's been caught. Nobody's been arrested. Like, nothing has happened. So of course there's multiple people just doing the same thing in this little area. And I feel like the RCMP knows that. And I think they're probably scared to face that reality that there are multiple serial killers they have to deal with. But at the end of the day, that's your job. You woke up, you went to school for this, you decided, you went through training, every program, whatever, you decided that you wanted to be a police officer for whatever reason. And that's just the job you signed up for. So you have to do it. You literally have no choice. So yeah, the RCMP gets a major F minus if they have to be on my scale. I would put them off of it. They don't deserve a spot anyway, but they get an F minus. And as much as I hope things have changed, current cases have proved that that is not the case, and it's taking a much longer time than it should. But I hope one day Indigenous women all around the world, especially in Canada, get the justice that they deserve. So my sources for this week's case have been afn.ca, cbsnews.com, findagrave.com, highwayoftears.org, the Highway of Tears documentary by Matt Smiley on YouTube, thehueandcry.com, wikipedia.org, www.aptnnews.ca, www.cbc.ca, and www.chrc-ccdp.gc.ca. And yeah, guys, that is it for today's episode. I know it was a long one. I know it was extremely disheartening, extremely sad. I truly wish that one day we can all just see people for what they are. Obviously, as a Black woman, it hits home where any women of color, any woman period, but especially women of color, when we're just mistreated in our communities and our spaces, especially Indigenous people. Let's start there. Like, it's very layered. This whole thing is so layered, but for people who own this land before anybody else, for people who sat here and built lives for themselves to just get colonized and taken over and then treated as if they're less than. Mind you, these are the people that taught the people that colonized this country how to even survive here. So it's like without these people, our foundation, it's like such a slap in the face to not really care about the people that were here before you. Like the way that we care about our elders and, oh my gosh, respect the elderly, they were here before you. Care about the people that own this land and walked it before you. They should be the highest priority, if anything. And I just hope one day that people who are different, people from different walks of life, different skin colors, everyone can just live equal. I know it's going to be a very hard feat, but I really do hope that one day I live to see it, my kids live to see it, my grandkids, my great-great-grandkids, my great-great-great-great-great. I just hope that one day we can all just understand that we're all the same, we're all one. Nothing changes you, no matter how much money you have, the color of your skin, where you grew up, like nothing matters. None of that matters at all. We're all human at the end of the day. We all deserve life. We all deserve happiness. We all deserve peace. So, yeah. I love you guys so, so much. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to follow the show. Don't forget to give me ratings and comment, like it, anything you can. Follow the Instagram. I'm still trying to get the TikTok in order, so please bear with me. But yeah, I love you guys so, so much. Please take care of yourselves. Please take care of one another. Please love one another. Love yourself. And I will see you next week as we put the Mer in Murder. Bye.